And welcome everyone to Paranormal Roundtable. I'm your host, Josh Turner, and you can call me Wolf. And I'm with Tony. You can call him Mushu. I'm with Anthony.
You can just call me Anthony.
You can just call him plain old Anthony. Or you can call him what I call him. And that's, you did what? You didn't do it? That's how I call him.
If you call me what Wolf called me, you'd be saying a lot of cuss words.
Oh my God.
What?
He's not very nice.
He's
a very mean man. He's a big fat mean
This
head.
seems like slander.
I think it is. I'm going to sue this guy. Or what does the one lady say? My nieces and nephews work for me for free on the show or something.
Yeah.
we do.
Yeah,
but that's beside the point.
We work for him for free, and then he takes our food. That's why we're skinny, and he's not.
I told you guys we should go where the beer flows like wine. Little place called Aspen. I don't know. The French are buttholes. I don't know. But a little reference there to Dumb and
We should go where wings take dream.
So, if you have a problem with the show, just write everything down that you don't like and put it in an envelope and mail it to the complaint department in Nome, Alaska, and they will be glad to take care of you. Now, it's only up to you to find the address.
Yeah, we're actually thinking about outsourcing our complaint department to India, so that you can get on the phone with them and they just aggravate you until you stop.
Well, we heard
you
they
just
have
give
such
up.
great customer service.
They have very great customer service. That's
They're
what
the
they
best.
do, man.
Very American.
We're going to send you to Bangladesh, or we're going to outsource it. It's going to be somewhere where
Timbuktu, who
It's
knows?
between India,
Timbuktu.
Pakistan, and
Kathmandu.
Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka.
Sri Lanka. You will end up there somewhere. So, folks, here's what we got going on. Enough joking here, enough chuckle house here. Paranormal Roundtable has a multiple tier deal where you can get a PRT swag bag. $10, it takes 2 months, and then $20 is automatic, and then 30, 40, 50. Each one gets you a better swag bag. That's for the Patreon. The links are right there. You'll see. Also, we'll put the link up, I guess, probably again for the conference if you want to check it out. The conference that was held 2 or 3 weeks ago. And then we also just remember this: the $40 tier gets you one of my autograph books, $50 tier gets you both. But we also throw in other books from other authors like Barton Nunley, Nick Redfern, David Weatherly, Lyle Blackburn, Ken Gerhardt, Chad Lewis. Those people, you'll get their books. Now, here's what I'm going to tell you: we are coming out with the fall line as of this point right now. We're going to start putting some prototypes out there. Tell me what you want. Tell me what you think that should be in the store. If there's something that you want to see in the Paranormal Roundtable store, we are working on I think it may already be completed by now, the hoodies that actually are zip up, where they have like the patch on one side. You guys got them, and what do you guys think?
They look nice. I mean, I like the coloring so far.
Everything.
I want to wash it first because it still has that smell.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
So then it has the logos on the back, and they come in different colors. And so me and Anthony have been working on trying to get that done. The swag bags are a great deal, and it's also a good way to support the show. And we love to give away merchandise. We do a giveaway every week. If you leave a comment in the Paranormal Roundtable group, or no, is it Paranormal Roundtable group, right?
Yeah, it's group.
If you leave a comment on there and on Facebook, you can win a prize, which is an autographed book from a different author. Now, that being said, if you want to be friends with me on Facebook, okay, just let me know that you are a listener. Also, I'm Josh Turner 940 on Instagram. Tony, who are you?
I'm PRT Mushu on Instagram and Facebook. I post some stuff about the show, so it's pretty cool.
So they can send you a friend request as long as they let you know who they are.
And you can message me on either of those. You can also send me stories on those platforms as well. I try my best to answer. And I've been getting better about it.
And people hit up you, Nelly, Scorp, me, everybody. Pretty much, we get messages and we get stories. And don't think that you're bothering me or bombarding me with stuff. I don't mind. Okay. And now Josh Turner at prtpodcast.com. That is the coordinates. And if you're still sending stories to the old email, I do check that one occasionally too. DosWolfman88@gmail.com. I know some people still have that one.
Yeah, like, it's for our first couple shows, so I mean,
well, it wasn't a couple. It was
for a lot, but I mean, yeah.
That's why it's because people still send it to that one, because if they'll start watching the show, like I handed somebody a business card the other day and we were shopping at, I think we were at Sprouts, and I gave somebody a business card, and then they went and they started from the beginning. So they were like, I emailed you, and I went back in there and I was like, oh, that's the old email. Let me go check it. Well, both of them have a lot of stuff, and there's a lot of stuff in all of my emails. And so, yeah. And so there's ways to get in touch with me. Hit me up on Facebook. That's an easy way. Instagram, that's another easy way. Just hit me up. I'm pretty reachable. I try to stay, and I talk to my witnesses that give me stories and stuff pretty regularly. And I do my best to try to keep, your names anonymous as much as possible, unless it's okay. Or if you want your name put out there too. But then that brings up a whole nother ball of wax. Like, if somebody's pushing for their name to be on there, why? You're kind of like, why? Yeah, it's kind of weird. But it's up to you folks how you want to do it. I'm easy to deal with, just hit me up. So that being said, let's get started. We have another fun-filled night of talking about Dogman over here. It just seems like this is the creature that everybody is talking about, and it's so creepy. I just don't know what to call it. I mean, I don't know what to say. The first one I'm going to talk about is this one is going to grab your attention. Well, there's two that really will grab that are going to grab you, but this is one that really grabbed me. And this one happened right outside of Memphis, Tennessee. Now, this guy claims, and this is, like I said, he claims this. His name's Clyde. And he sent me a message and he said, I got to tell you a story. I know that you do these stories. My granddaughter and my daughter both listen to you. He's my daughter, my granddaughter both listen to you. And he said, I'd like to give you my story. And he was encouraged to send it with a little help from his granddaughter. Thank goodness, because she's more tech savvy than he is. But years ago, and I didn't get an exact date on when this happened, but it was back in the late 70s, as far as it was what I was told. I don't know the exact date. He was working in his tool shed that was behind his house, and he heard something that sounded like a snarling, growling, whatever, and he thought it was one of his dogs. Now, he had two dogs. He said he had one that was a very good, very kind, very outgoing lab. And then he said I had a horrible hound that did nothing but sleep and bite people. I mean, those are his exact words. He goes, this dog was mean. It would bite people. He goes, my dog was like a redneck. Okay. He goes, he just didn't like anybody. He was mean. He goes, my best friend would come over, and my friend, he said he had a friend that come over, and it bit his friend. And then it almost cost him a 27-year friendship. So this dog was pretty useless. My great Uncle Bill, God rest his soul, had a dog he named Dud, and its real name was Zero. And he called it Dud, and it once bit my grandpa on the butt. So I can tell you about dogs.
It lived up to its name.
It lived up to its name, but he protected the. And it's funny because he had Desiree, who was a German Shepherd, highly trained, and she was cool with me, but she didn't like anybody else. And so she liked me and my cousin Trey, but she didn't like anybody else. But Dud was just, you couldn't trust him. He was weird. He would growl. And the Turner farm, it was where the house used to be. And I'd get, playing outside or whatever. And one day I was in the back of the house and we were playing hide and seek, me and like 6, 7 of my cousins, and Zero came around the other side of the house. I didn't trust him. And he had me like right there by this tree, and I didn't know what he was going to do. And there was like a hill right there. So I just started running down the hill to get away from him, and he chased me. And I didn't think I could make it up the tree fast enough. And Desiree, she was behind a dog run, like in a fenced-in little closed-in area. And then at night, they would let her roam around to protect the property. Mm. Well, she jumped onto her doghouse and jumped over that fence and chased after him and kind of hit him and made him roll. And then I run into my cousin Clayton. Y'all know Clayton. Yeah. My cousin used to be a pitcher for the Texas A&M. And if you're a A&M baseball fan, whatever, he was a pitcher. And so ended up like running into him, and he's like, what's going on? And I was like, Uncle Bill's dog, was chasing me. And so we went back up the hill, and luckily Desiree had they didn't really fight. She just kind of knocked him down, and then he went his way and she went hers. But thank goodness, that she was a very protective dog. And she liked me, but she didn't like anybody else hardly at all. Like she was just, me, Uncle Bill, and Trey.
Just did her job.
Mm-hmm. So anyway, that's a little sidelight story. I don't want to take up too much time talking about it.
It's crazy how there's always just like one bad dog. Like there's always just like one. You always have one amazing, just one like one of a kind dog, and just one horrible one that you wish I wish I could get rid of this. But it's already grandfathered in. I can't do anything about it.
We have one like that, but and she's getting more cantankerous by the day. But maybe she's just getting old. But the thing is. The reason I tell that story, though, folks, because you're going to see why, okay? It follows suit with what I'm going to talk about. Now, he did say that he was in the backyard, and he looked down, and his hound was up on the porch asleep, not paying attention. Now, his other dog, the lab, he was right there growling at something in the woods. Now, he didn't have a back fence. There was no fence around this. And so he went around to see what he was growling at, and we've heard this before. He sees this kind of blurry looking thing. And this was years before the Predator movie. But he said, dude, I'll never forget. When I first saw the Predator, my grandson brought it over on VHS and we watched it. And he's like, and I'm sitting there watching this Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. And he goes, and I'm like, oh my gosh, dude. He goes, dude, my heart began to beat like, really fast. He's like, I saw this, the way it cloaked, And he told me about it. He said, he goes, dude, my hands started sweating. I felt like I was going to faint, because what he saw, he said that day, what he saw, he goes, I'll never forget. He goes, the leaves came up away from the tree and moved independently. And he goes, and I was like, oh my gosh, what am I staring at? What am I looking at? What is this? And he said it was about 7 to 8 foot tall. And he said that it slowly came into focus. And it became like a shimmering, grayish looking just blob. And then it just morphed slowly into what looked like a werewolf. And he says, and I'm staring at this gray, humongous headed creature. And it was so weird. He goes, like, it just stepped out of like the void, which he realized that what it was, where the trees and all that was, that there was nothing there. It was like it was imitating the foliage around it. And he's like, it tricked me. He goes, I know my own property, but he goes, it was like I was believing in this illusion, And he said that when it stepped forward, it actually spoke physically. Now, this is what's also weird. It didn't go with the mind speak and all that. It was like it said something to him, but it was garbled. He couldn't understand it. Now, I'll do my best to try to repeat it, but it said something like Dargara, or Debrara. And it was like, he just said it like a couple different times. And he didn't understand what he was saying. But when he said that Debrara thing, it kind of reminded me of Gadara, which is what Linda Godfrey talked about in her book. And so I asked him if he was familiar with, Linda Godfrey covering that particular case. And I'm not going to get into a whole big old thing. Go look it up. It's a whole, but he said Debrara, and this creature, and this story I didn't get. This isn't. I haven't had it that long. It's not been that very long since I've had this story. But he said that when I told him that, I said that there was a security guard that had actually encountered a creature that spoke to it like that, and it said that. And I said, because when he said that, I said, are you sure it didn't say Gadara? And he says, no. It started with a D, Debrara. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. So I don't know. Maybe these things have some kind of language or something that we're not aware of, or maybe that, and then it involves that sounds like that. Well, most of the time, though, you get it like with mind speak. It's not like it's talking to you. This thing moved its mouth, kind of like the Hidalgo dog story, where they were speaking Spanish, and that, of course, is a very strange case, too, and from my hometown. And I was actually in my hometown earlier today, and I was talking to someone, and that kind of was brought up about the books, and this particular cousin of mine asked me about the books, and so I was like, oh, okay. And that whole case kind of came up, What's interesting, though, to me is as soon as it did, the dog, he said it was like the dog was in suspended animation. He's like, his dog was like one paw up off the ground and wasn't moving. And then this thing kind of backed up into the trees. It didn't cloak again or anything, but it just kind of backed up and then it just walked backwards and then it was just kind of like it was gone. Like he saw this weird kind of blur and then he ran into the house. He had to literally grab the dog by its collar and get it to move, and then the dog began to move. But he said that the dog was kind of in a zombified state. And the whole time, his useless hound dog sits up on the porch asleep, doesn't care about devour, doesn't care about the other dog, doesn't care about the cloaking or the foliage. He's just like, I'm asleep.
Deborah, I'm tired. I don't give a crap.
I don't care. It was
maybe
like
that
sleep.
werewolf will take the dog off his hands. Useless thing.
So he goes up the steps, and he had one of those screened-in back porches, right? But there was like this little overlap where the dog liked to lay, because the dog liked to go, you'd be able to be free and run around, whatever. He said as soon as he gets up to the steps, the useless dog gets up and just follows them inside the house or whatever. And he said that it was so frustrating, that like he tried to talk to we had at that time a girlfriend. She came over and she just thought he was crazy and looked at him like he was out of his freaking mind and went so far as to even act like he was lying about it. She's like, are you being honest with me, Clyde? Is this real? And he's like, why would I make something like that up? He goes, I saw a werewolf. And so years go by and he had some chickens back there and eventually they got something, they got messed with and something was picking them off. He was certain that it was this creature, but he couldn't catch it. He said, I sat up in my back porch for weeks, with my shotgun, just waiting for this thing to come back. He goes, I had a 308 and I had a shotgun and I was ready to just blow it to hell where it came from. Never saw it. And then he would go inside the next day. Some of his chickens would be missing. And so, the time goes by and the lab eventually went missing. And he was convinced that this thing had done something to it. He goes, that rotten hound, it sat out there on the back porch. And by this time, it was already 12 years old or something. Pretty cool story, though, in one respect. And I'll tell you why. He was working and he had like a carport, that he had built himself. Like he had this little plot of land. And this thing came up to the side of the carport. And he was in there doing something, messing with it and in his carport with his brother. They were messing with a car. And his brother goes around the side. They hear a boom, 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 something bump. And I shouldn't have told that part first. That's why they knew what it was. I kind of gave it away. But he goes around the side and he sees this creature. And he yells, he's like, Clyde, there's something around the side of the house. You might want to come look. And his brother runs back in there and they had a big old python, like big old gun. If you don't know what a python is, look it up. It's 357. He goes and grabs it. He goes around the side of the house. He's getting ready to shoot this thing. And when he comes around the side, he sees it. He's like, oh, it's that creature, And he said it had been, several years. He had not seen this thing, but he knew that it was around. Mm-hmm. And so he said that his brother goes and takes a shot at it. And he said immediately it squats down and then moves on all fours real fast. And then it starts to blend in with the grass. And he said that his brother was in shock. He said, oh my gosh. It's like, you could see there's like this mirror coming off of it and it runs off into the woods. Well, the next day he's in that carport and he's like real apprehensive and he's covering the car and he's like, I'm just going to put this project on hold for a little while. I don't trust what's going on here. And as he's walking out, he sees in the corner of the carport, he sees that something isn't correct. Like he sees the edge of the carport. It's not lining up. And he's like, oh no. And he looks around and he's got his gun, but it's on, he remembers that he left it on the car seat. And he's like, dude, my brain was so frazzled. I was like, he's like, so I picked up a wrench and my hands were shaking. And he goes, and the cover wasn't completely on the car yet. And he's like, and I go to reach for the door and I see it move, and I said, oh no. And I asked him, I said, did you hear any sound or smell anything? He goes, it always smelled like dog pee and blood. That's what he said. But he said that he didn't hear anything until it stepped forward and it heard like the crunch of the footstep. It wasn't like the Predator where you hear that clicking, that whatever noise. It wasn't nothing like that. And I asked, and I've asked multiple witnesses that. But this, it comes out and it's standing there and he goes, and then it just comes into focus. And he's like, it is this werewolf looking creature again. And he's like, and I'm standing there and I'm holding a wrench and I'm like, what am I going to do? And he says, and then it comes around the other side of the car. As I started to move, it tried to mirror my movements. And as fate would have it, he looks over right on his workbench. He has a hatchet. So he throws the wrench at it and nails it. Just it throws its arm up and it hits its arm. And he goes, dude, I threw it so hard that it had to have hurt it. And I heard it kind of make a noise like, you know. He's like, and then I grabbed the hatchet and this thing came at me and it was like 1 second and it was like 5 or 6 feet. It was just like right on me. And he goes, and I just took the hatchet and I just plunged it right into its chest. And he goes, and just then I see this flash behind this creature and it's my dog. It's that useless dog who was missing teeth at this point, and this dog had latched onto its like back of its leg and then was up biting like the buttocks area, and the thing was being distracted by it, and it's got this hatchet plunged into its chest, and it was flesh and blood, this creature. But you know, it was, at least it was materializing as flesh and blood. And it turned and it smacked him like with a hand, and it cut him. He goes, it gave me a big cut across my chest, knocked me backwards several feet. And then he goes, but I was determined. He goes, I look over and there's this rock. And he's like, I'll never forget. It was like a blue rock with little googly eyes on it that one of my grandchildren had made me when they were in kindergarten. And he said, Papa, this is a pet rock. And he's like, he grabs it and he runs up and he goes, as incredible as this sounds, he goes, this is the absolute truth. I nailed this thing right in the side of upside the head. And it sounded like a coconut splitting, you know.
That's a good pet rock.
And so he turns and he goes, and by this point, it had picked up my dog and was choking the life out of it. And it had a thumb, like its thumbnail, like into its throat. And so he's like, you know, he knew that the hound was done for. And he managed to get, that thing had slung the axe down onto the ground. He goes, I picked it up and I swung. And when I did, it threw its arm at me again. And while it was busy trying to kill his dog, it turned. And when it did, I sliced its arm open so wide. The crazy thing was that hardly any blood was coming out of this thing. That's what's weird. Like, there was not a lot of blood. He goes, dude, the thing should have been bleeding like crazy, but it wasn't. There was blood, but it was like, and the hide is really hard. Like, he's like, it was like, you know, naga hide. But he goes, when I cut through it, I could see the bone and everything on this creature, and it screamed. And then it just like dropped the dog and then took off, jumped over the dog and was out the garage and was gone. He's like, and then it just did that cloaking thing it did and was gone. He said, I'm no worse for the wear. You know, I mean, he goes, to this day, I haven't, and I had to ask, I said, Clyde, I mean, you haven't like had the urge to go and like pee on a tree on all fours, or you're not scratching for fleas, you're not like,
you're not peeing on fire hydrants.
Yeah, you're not like waking up at the zoo, are you? Like something's happening, you know, and like you're in the wolf cages or with the wolf, you know, whatever. He said, no, fortunately not. I'm not. I haven't had any, you know, I'm not a werewolf.
That's exactly what a werewolf would say.
Yeah. And I'm like, oh, I know where you're at, Clyde. He's moved to one state over. But he told me, he's like, dude, he goes, it's the craziest thing ever. He goes, I don't, you know, recommend it, you know, fighting with a werewolf, you know. But he claims to have like fought this thing, and he's not interested in being famous or telling anybody, whatever. And from what he has been told by his granddaughter, which is probably correct, she listens to the show. And shout out to you for sending me this story. I appreciate it. But the thing is, he knows enough to know that maybe he shouldn't reveal himself, because these things are or can be considered like assets. And I'm not going to get into what that is, but yeah. And so I told him, I said, maybe you're on the right course, just to keep it, you know, and I'll tell the story and we'll keep it anonymous. But I mean, what do you guys think about that? Like, I mean, if it's to be believed, then I'm not questioning the guy. I mean, he sounded very, very believable. But I mean, if it's a true story, what was it? I mean, what was going on there? And he never saw it again. So maybe giving it a good, you know, a licking between him and his dog. And the story ends on a happy note. The dog lived, but it did destroy its vocal cords. But he said the dog never barked anyway, so it didn't matter. But the dog lived another 2 years, and then the dog died of old age. But I mean, it helped him. I mean,
a broken clock is only broken is right 2 hours of the day.
Fools can't fool me again.
Yeah.
The broken clock is speaking right now, actually, or he just spoke.
Oh,
Broken clock is right twice a day.
Yeah, you understand what I'm saying. I mean, thankfully the dog is useless most of the time, but it was useful when it needed to be.
Yeah.
And what I find interesting is like I wonder if that blur kind of like haze that he kind of first noticed on this thing, I wonder if that's less of them doing something and more of like us doing something. Like maybe if it's like us opening like our mind's eye or whatever, so we're able to see it clearly, or if it like as soon as we see it, we trigger something that allows us to be able to kind of discern what it is exactly better. So because when you hear that kind of story, it makes you wonder like, oh, is it able to like blur itself, like, you know, is able to like use CGI on itself and make it look weird, or is it, you know, doing something mystical or magical? But it might just be that it might be something that we're doing that we're not able to understand yet either.
Is real or is Desinix? What do you think, Anthony? I mean,
I think the fact that this thing it attempted to attack, it was counterattacked, and then it ran away and it never came back. These things are territorial. If they're in the wild and they claim a certain area, that they're not going to stop. They're not going to stop coming back at you. In my opinion, if they feel like you are a threat to them, then they will probably continue to try and harass you until they eventually eliminate you. But the fact that it didn't makes me think that maybe this particular creature was actually, like you said, an asset. Now, an asset to who or what? It might not even be an asset to something that was human. I don't know, but I think that maybe this thing was either released in that area, or maybe it wasn't supposed to be in that area, and wherever it ran off to, it never came back from because maybe it was retrieved.
What I find interesting, and I may be wrong in this, but it seems to be that these single dogmen out are very like feral, or maybe seem to be a little bit more unruly. Maybe it seems like these encounters seem to be a lot more aggressive. I mean, you'd hear a lot of these like huge pack aggressive encounters as well, but these single ones seem to be like they don't have to play by the rules as much compared to like some of these pack ones. I feel like they have a code or something that they go by to where it's like, you know, don't be seen doing this, or don't do this or this.
Oh, I get what you're saying.
Yeah, and like these lone ones out there,
these rogue ones,
or whatever they are, they just seem to be like, well, no one's watching me, so I can go all in. I can just do whatever I want here. So
yeah, I mean that's true. Just like people that live alone, they just do what they.
Yeah, they go feral.
Yeah, and it might be something like that. Or that's why it also left, because it wasn't really in that territory. It didn't control that territory. It was just in it. So it was like, okay, he won. I don't really want to fight. I can just go somewhere else.
So this next story we're going to get into, that's very interesting points you guys made, and I got to get moving to the next story, but it's food for thought. So this one came to me from a guy, and this guy, he's a really interesting guy, actually. He's lived a colorful life. He was in the military. He got out, and he wanted to be, I guess, off the grid, and so he became homeless. And he was homeless in the 90s, and it was a time when, there wasn't a lot, the 90s. Yeah, it wasn't a lot of homeless people around. There always were homeless people, like in the 90s too, but in the early to mid 90s, I don't remember like being a lot of homeless people when I was here, and so it's crazy though. This guy, so what he did, I guess he would be considered like a prowler. But he was like, I never did anything to somebody. I never broke into any houses, but I would illegally camp on people's property. And he said, and his name's Franklin. He's actually a really nice guy. He's kind of a soft-spoken guy, and he was recommended to me by someone. They said, this guy's got a terrifying tale to tell. And I said, okay. And I actually, it was somebody that I met at the food trucks. And they said, hey, and I was there one day with one of y'all, and I was like talking to somebody over at the, the burger place. It's actually pretty good.
Yeah, it's really good.
I forgot the name of it. But anyway, they make these.
Oh, Mighty Moe's.
Mighty Moe's, yeah. So I was in there, and I don't eat it much because I can't, but you guys do. But I was in there picking up something. Nelly wanted something, so I had to make a late night run. I think you were with me, Anthony, but you were talking to Brian.
Yeah.
And so I was over there, and this guy was in there, and I'd given him my card. And he says, he saw the little werewolf on the card. It's a heavy-set black guy. I think you've seen him in there before. And he says, I know a guy that's got a story about a werewolf or werewolves. So he introduced me, or he sent me his information. And so I reached out to the guy. And it was weird. Like, I just got a call out of the blue. And I'm like, who's this? And he goes, well, who's this? I was told to call this number. And so then I was like, well, you called me, dude. He's like, well, my name's Franklin. I was like, well, I'm Josh Trent. He goes, okay, bingo. You're the guy I need to talk to. He's like, I got a story. He goes, and I've been holding it for years. He said, literally, I've been holding it for almost 30 years. And I said, oh, okay. And I said, well, go ahead, speak. So he starts telling me this crazy story. And he said, dude, I've seen some really wild things. And he's got a couple other weird things that have happened to him. But that's not for that. This show, right? This one particular episode is I will talk about those on the live stream. This story is his dogman encounter, and it's not really connected to the other stuff. Although I think it is all connected, and I think the reason that he was, able to do and see the things he saw was after he had this encounter. I still believe that happens, but we'll talk about that on the live stream. What happened to Franklin? He was on on highway, and I think you looked it up, Tony or Anthony. What is it? Leander and
that's Highway 29 between Leander and Georgetown.
Now, folks, if you're a listener and you're a veteran of the show, you're a veteran of listening to the show, then you know that I had an encounter with a naked man who was running. Years ago when I was working, they were opening at home over there in Leander. I guess, would it be Leander or Cedar Park?
That's Leander,
right?
Yeah. I mean, it's like they're right next to each other. It's hard to know sometimes.
And we were doing a site that was a retirement home, and Scorpio was working over there. And so you guys y'all had to stay there. You did, Anthony.
Yeah.
And actually, your stepdad was working with us. And they had to stay there and guard because we needed like 5 guards or something because some guy threatened to shoot up the place or something because he was mad. One of the electricians was crazy. Yeah. So I said, I have to leave. And I told Clark and everybody, I said, I have to go and drop food off to Scorpio. He's over there in Georgetown. So I took Highway 29 and that going down that road in the middle of nowhere, and this was probably 2010 or 11? No, maybe 12.
No, this was later than that.
I'd say 2012. It couldn't have been later than that.
I thought it was like 13, 14.
You know what? It might have been 13. Yeah, it might have been because it was the year after I got sick. I remember I was in the hospital.
Yeah.
So it had to have been 2013.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're right. 2013. Anyway, one thing that was cool was we worked with a guy whose dad, whose son played for the Rams, NFL. So I like I remember working at that account, but a lot of weird stuff happened there. And there was some weird kind of paranormal spooky stuff that went on, which it was like that place, they had a hard time opening it, if I remember correctly. And so I was driving and I see this it was a Caucasian guy and he was just running and I just see him jump over the fence and then just he ran and just crossed the road and jumped back over the other fence and was gone into the pasture. And I was like, what the heck? I couldn't believe it. You remember when I came back and I said there was a naked guy just ran. He didn't run right in front of my vehicle. Like he was a good 60, 70 yards ahead of me. I could see him in the distance, but I thought it was just bizarre and weird.
Well, that was either one of Austin's local cryptids or a guy who just happened to transform and just came back.
Well, let me tell you what Franklin kind of made me wonder because when he started telling me his encounter, now he was wandering around out there off of 29. This is back before the toll road, back before any of that. And he had been camping out on a property where the people that owned the property, they weren't really aware that he was there and he was camping. He would move around from place to place. And he would just, when he would go into town, he would stop and get supplies and water and stuff, and then go back out and he would camp out in the brush. Now, like I said, he had other encounters. One of them was a Bigfoot encounter, but that's not what this episode's about. And that was somewhere south of Austin. But he was all over the outskirts of Austin, all over these neighboring towns, whatever. He would camp, and he was a solo person. He hung out by himself. What he told me was so disturbing and crazy. He said, I was walking out there one day and I see these 4 large wolf-like creatures. And he goes, now I'd seen one before when I was on the other side near Driftwood. Now, I've talked about Driftwood before on the show. And he said, I saw one running around and I thought, man, that thing is huge. It's large. He goes, so I climbed up a tree and I just observed it. And eventually it kind of sniffed the air and it just kind of ran off into the brush and I didn't deal with it again. And then so the next morning I just got, whatever. Well, he said this time he saw 4 of them and he's like, it was like 2 years from the first time I'd seen one. And I thought, oh, it's these giant wolf-like creatures again. He says wolf-like because they had these ridges on their backs and they didn't look like coyotes. He goes, they were definitely not coyotes. And he said, and they were chasing something. And he goes, and I realized they were chasing a cow. And he goes, they were getting after this cow and they had kind of isolated it and the other cows had all just, you could hear them mooing and they were all just running in different directions and they had cut one out of this herd. And he goes, and I was, a good 100 yards away from the cow, the herd, and maybe about 50 yards, not far, he goes, maybe 50 yards from where they were chasing that cow and they started coming toward me. He goes, and then one of them stops and kind of stands up on its hind legs and then becomes fully erect. And he said, and it was about 7-8 foot tall. And he goes, oh my gosh, what am I looking at, dude? He goes, I had never seen anything like this before in my life. He said, I was staring at a real life werewolf. He goes, and there were 3 more with it. And that one didn't even look like the biggest one. He said, there was a big one that was black. And he goes, and I could see by the light of the moon that they had caught the cow and had knocked it down and they were tearing it up. They were eating it, They were basically eating it alive. It was horrific. And he goes, and I'm sitting there watching this. He goes, and that other one's just kind of staring at me. He goes, then it gets down and kind of goes over to the other ones. And then they all just kind of turned and looked in his direction. He goes, but the grass was tall. He goes, so I got down on my belly. He goes, and I literally just began to crawl. And I looked around and I saw an oak tree. And I just began to crawl towards it. He goes, because these other cedar brush trees, you can't do nothing. There's nothing, So he goes, I crawled toward the oak tree. And he says, I must have been maybe, in between Leander and Georgetown, like too far out in the middle of nowhere. There's even like middle of nowhere pasture there now. Imagine back then, when Georgetown wasn't a huge city and Leander was a dot on the road, on the map. There was nothing out there, nobody out there. He's like, I could have screamed my head off and nobody would have known. He goes, and the people who owned those cows, they had no clue that this was going on, And so he goes, I run over there to that tree and I climb up it. And he goes, and then I look back and they were busy doing what they were doing. And he goes, and I watched them literally devour this animal in like minutes, dude. And then you could hear them crunching the bones. And it was like, you could hear them popping and crunching from where I was at. He said, and then once it was over, he goes, I'm thinking, oh my gosh. He goes, I look at my watch. It's 4:48 a.m. He goes, sunrise ain't for a couple more hours, dude. He goes, and I am like stuck like Chuck up in a tree. And he goes, and I'm wearing black. He's like, and I'm an African-American, he goes, I'm a black man, and I'm up in this tree and these things are like devouring this animal. And he's like, and I'm thinking that's not going to be enough to feed them. So they're either going to go and call another one from the herd or they're going to come after me, and he said, dude, I thought that night, I thought I was going to die. He goes, I spent that whole night praying, man. He goes, I'm not going to lie to you. He's like, I just prayed. He goes, and I had a cross, a necklace that was given to me by my great aunt years ago. As I pulled it out of my pocket, I just held on to it. And when his grandmother had died, she'd had it blessed. And so she was converted to Orthodox Christian. And he said his grandmother was half white, half black. And he said that his grandmother's father, who was white, who was Orthodox, and the mother was black, she was Southern Baptist, she had chosen to be Orthodox. But then subsequently everybody else became Baptist, in his family. But he said that she really believed in the supernatural big time. And her dad was of Eastern European descent. But he said, he goes, I know by looking at me, you wouldn't know that my grandmother was actually really light-skinned, half white woman. But she had this cross, and she gave it to me, or gave it to my great aunt before she died, her younger sister, and was told that when her time comes to give it to him, so on her deathbed, gave it to him. And she had survived a fatal accident, literally. And he thinks that cross, he believes, and that's his belief, and it was silver. But he believes that's what saved him, or saved her. So he was holding it. And he said that sure enough, these things get done doing what they're doing, and they start kind of sniffing the air, and he said they're all red from doing what they were doing. He said, and they got down on all fours, and they all just kind of started trotting over toward me. And he's like, and he goes, I'm way up in this tree. Like, this is a big oak tree. And he said, now, I did have a weapon. I had a spear that I had made. He goes, and it was like a stick that had a point on it. And he said, I once fended off a coyote, which he thought was rabid, with this stick. So, but what he did was he got a piece of metal from a friend of his who had a knife sharpening place in Austin. I think I know who he's talking about, because it used to be on Burnett Road. But that person sharpened a triangular piece of metal, and he managed to fasten it to that stick. So he had like this half of a stick, it was like a spear. So he said he took it, and he was just holding it. He was just like waiting, and he's like, okay, I guess it's me and this stick against these four monsters, and eventually they come up to the tree to where he's at. And he told me, he goes, are you following what I'm saying? He asked me that multiple times. And I said, Frank, I'm following you. I'm following you. He goes, okay. Cause I was quiet. I wasn't speaking. So I guess he thought I wasn't paying attention. And I said, no, I'm listening. He goes, what I'm telling you is the absolute truth. He goes, I'm not going to lie. He goes, there's two things that I held dear to me that I never traded or sold or thought about getting rid of. And one was the Holy Bible, and the other one was that silver cross. He goes, and I kept that, and the chain wasn't silver. The chain had broken when he got attacked by some other homeless people, but he managed to keep the cross. He said, well, they were beating me. He goes, I put my hand on that cross, and then they got tired and they left. They just got tired of them, and they robbed him, But he said that cross was with me everywhere I went. And so he said, I had my backpack. And he goes, and when they came up to me, they started sniffing, and then one of them jumped up and just put its claws up and it just dug into the tree. And then he goes, I could see the feet, right? And he said, and it began to climb up the tree just like an ape. And he goes, and I looked down, and I said, let me guess. And I said, Frank, I'm going to ask you a question. What did the claws on the feet look like? And he described to me exactly what I saw when I was 15. I said, yep. That raptor-looking clawed toes they have, whatever. There was that kind of one of them. They don't all have that same description, but that one did. And he said it was big, and he said the head was huge. And he said, I'm going to tell you, he goes, I mustered up every courage I had in me. He's like, I'm not a huge man. I'm 6'1". He goes, but I weighed about 200 pounds. And so I'm not huge, but I'm not small. And he's like, and I was pretty young guy, and I was limber, He goes, and I just said, in the name of Christ, and I literally plunged that thing through its like skull, and he goes, and I'm thinking there's going to be this, I'm going to hit it and it's going to, kill it, whatever. He said all it did was slide over the top of its head, and then the thing kind of threw its hand up, and when it did, he pulled back, and he goes, and to this day, he goes, I don't know how I did this. He goes, I don't know how, it had to be God or something. He's like, I pushed at it again, and it caught it right in the chest, like in the clavicle area. And he goes, I could feel it like pop and crunch something. He goes, and this thing kind of made a noise, and I'm going to try to repeat the way he made the noise, but it was like that. And he said when it did, it sounded demonic, dude. He goes, it's like something you could never imagine what it sounded like. And he said, and then it just like, it started yanking on it. And then he goes, I look over and there's two more, and they're climbing up the other side. And he goes, and I thought, oh man, this is it. I'm done. I am completely done. And then he said, just then, like he asked God, he said, just forgive me for my sins. He goes, before I could even finish, he goes, I felt something grab me by my backpack. Now get this. And to this day, he says he believes this is divine intervention, dude. He sees a bright flash of light, and then they all kind of stop and they look. And he's like, I don't know what that was, but it got their attention, and they all just kind of like stopped. He goes, and then I see one of them just go flying up in the air. And I'm like, what the heck is that? It was the only one that was still like down there kind of watching. And he thinks that was the one that first noticed him. And he looks and he sees this humongous bull. And I guess it was just, you know, and he said, and then I look and there's another one and it's running around the other side. And the other creature that was going behind him was grabbing him from behind on his backpack. He goes, it was like its legs were dangling down, and that bull, I guess, had hooked its leg and like yanked him and was dragging him by its horn. And he's like, so I see these two bulls that are just hell-bent on killing these things. And he's like, I'm thinking this has to be the work of God. And he asked me, he's like, do you believe that? I said, absolutely, Frank. I believe in a higher power. I do believe in Christ and I believe in God. And he said, do you think that's what was happening? And I said, I mean, your guess is as good as mine. You were there. I wasn't. But he told me, he says, I believe that God saved me that day. He's like, that flash of light was unnatural, you know? And he goes, I don't know what it was, but it got their attention and it distracted them from those bulls. He goes, and those bulls, I think, were with that herd. He didn't think that they were supernatural, but he thinks that they may have been being commanded by something angelic or given some sort of authority to attack these creatures. And so the other one, he goes, that was holding on to the spear in its chest, he said its eyes narrowed like a man's, and it looked at him and it just kind of made like a huff, and then it jumped down and it just pulled that thing out of its chest and threw it. And then when one of the bulls, it was the biggest creature, and he said that when one of the bulls went by it, it just like swiped at it, and the bull kind of turned its head and then kind of flipped him over the top of it. And he said that when this was going, all this chaos was going on, he said, I got really, really sleepy, which is like just totally ridiculous. He goes, because my body had been coursing with adrenaline. And when I actually said that, not him, but I said, your body had to be full of adrenaline. He said, yeah, it was full of adrenaline. And he goes, and I was just like, you know, he goes, I was, you know, thinking I'm a dead man, you know, I'm doomed. You know, and he's like, but then these bulls come out of nowhere and start fighting with these creatures. And he said eventually they all kind of got the better of one of the bulls and kind of were killing it, you know. And he goes, and while they were doing that, he goes, something came over me and I got really, really sleepy. He goes, and then all of a sudden I felt like I just got like this burst of energy. And he said, I felt like the things were draining my energy too, like in close proximity, which was weird, you know. But then he said that he felt like compelled, like to try to do something, you know. So he jumped down and he grabbed that spear, and he goes, and I climbed back up the tree, and he goes, and when they were focused on the one bull, the other bull had kind of started to trot off, and then it would kind of come back and kind of try to help the other bull, but then it would kind of take off again. He's like, have you ever seen like National Geographic where these, you know, these bulls or whatever will defend the others, like these big bulls from Africa? And I said, I know what you're talking about. You're talking about Cape Buffalo. He goes, well, I don't know what they're called, but you know, that's what I'm talking about. They'll kind of come back and then put up a fight and then leave. But he said he took that spear, he goes, and I don't want to sound like the hero of this story or whatever. He goes, but this is the truth. He's like, I just said, God, let my aim be true. And I just threw it as hard as I could. And I nailed that big one right in the spine below its head. And it just kept flipping around, turning around. And then the other ones were distracted and were trying to pull the spear out of it. He goes, and one of those bulls just gored the hell out of one of them. And then when it started to do that, the other bull came back, and then all of them just started to kind of go in a retreat. And the big one was just trying to pull that thing out of its back. So it fell down on all fours on its paws or whatever. He kept calling them pads, but I don't know what. But anyway, he said it fell on its paws, and then those two bulls were just tossing it around. And eventually, it got up after all that damage it took, and it jumped over the fence. And he said that, dude, it was staggering, and it went out into the highway. He goes, and just then a car is driving by, and the thing just flopped down real quick and got straight flat down, and it was on the other side of the fence, and the bulls were just kind of sitting there looking at it, and one of them was all tore up. Its leg was useless, and it was haggard, and they both kind of just trotted off. He goes, you could tell they looked identical, like they were brothers or something. And he said that, he goes, I was standing there, or I was just sitting there stunned at what I had seen, and at that point I was down to my pocket knife, which is all I had, and he goes, and there's not a whole lot I was going to do with that. But he goes, I figured that if I had to, I'd use it. And he said, I saw the others running across the pasture, across the highway. He said, as soon as that vehicle left, the thing got up and began to stagger across the road. And then he said, the weirdest part of the whole story, when it got across the road, he goes, I could see it. It was a full moon. And he asked me if I thought that the full moon had something to do with it. I said, I have no idea. I mean, I've heard stories of people seeing them at the full moon, but that may be they can just see them because it's a full moon. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And he asked me if I thought that they were werewolves. Well, the reason that he thinks that they're werewolves, like shapeshifters, is because this thing looked like it was shrinking and becoming like the size of a man. And he said, I was afraid that maybe I had stabbed a man with that spear and that he was going to lay there and die. And then there was going to have my fingerprints all over it and think I killed a guy. And so and when he was done, he said it got up and it jumped over the fence, like it fell over the fence and then staggered and kept running off into the pasture, into the woods. And it never did pull the spear out of its back. And I said, let me tell you something, Frank, you're gonna trip out when I tell you this. But one time I was driving down that road and I always just thought it was odd. But I saw a naked man run across that road, jump over that fence and then go. And I've told this on the show. I've told you, Anthony, Tony. And here it is years later after I saw that. I mean, freaking heck, if it was 2013, that was 10 years ago. And it was October. So this is coming up on October. So that's 10 years ago. And just now I get this story from a guy who was in that area. Maybe it wasn't the exact same area, but it was on that same road where he claims that there was this encounter. And he says, dude, it was so weird and unnatural. He goes, in all my years, he goes, I see some weird stuff. He goes, I've seen a full-bodied apparition. He said, I was with a group of other guys we were homeless, and we were wandering around in Oklahoma. And he goes, and I saw what looked like UFOs. And he also had a Bigfoot encounter. But he goes, dude, and he said, I'm definitely an experiencer. But that was the first, other than the full-bodied apparition he saw when he was young, a teenager. But he said, dude, I saw this in Canada. I was like, this had to be, divine intervention. He said, I was toast. I was going to be dead. I was next. He goes, because when they were done eating that cow, it was easier just to come up to me, I guess, and mess with me than go and pick off another one. And he said, now looking back on it, it's probably because there were bulls in that herd that were around. Mm-hmm. And he said that, they were there protecting the herd or whatever it is, But I also explained to him that when bulls are typically that cantankerous, they're cordoned off from the other animals. So somehow those bulls were in that, same pasture. And so I asked him just for my own FYI, I asked him, I said, what is the strangest thing you've ever seen or heard other than that? And he said, well, I did have the UFO encounter, which was weird. There was like these blue lights in the sky and they were coming together and disappearing, He said, and then I saw a ghost when I was 14 years old in the house we lived in. Dad was a military. He was an army brat. He traveled all over. He said he thinks that's where he got his, rootless, traveling all over the place, He's now been in Austin for the last so many years or whatever. He came back and decided to stay. But he told me, he said, dude, at one time I was camping out on the other side of Blanco. Now, if you guys know, Blanco also is an area full of dogman area. And he said that he heard, like Native Americans chanting. He goes, and it came out of nowhere and it was loud, dude. And he goes, and I wandered around and I went over this hill and I looked and I didn't see anything. He goes, but it was like it was just coming from nowhere, but from everywhere. He goes, and I just thought that was really weird, But anyways, he goes, and then I just went back, and after about an hour of this chanting, I went to sleep. And but he goes, it was an area where a friend of his had camped in that area and told him that he had found Comanche arrowheads. And that area, that's the edge of the Devil's Backbone. So, I mean, who knows? But anyway, that's that story. And he's a really colorful guy too. I talked to him at length about different stuff. You know, he's kind of opinionated. He's got his own kind of ideas about the world, you know, but I guess when you've camped all over and then you've survived a night like that, you know, I mean, I guess you can be opinionated. He said that he took a look at his backpack and it was shredded. Like this thing he felt it just grab it one time, but the backpack was completely gone. Like it was torn to pieces and there was no use for it at all. It was gone. But, what do you think of that? I mean, is Franklin to be believed? I mean, you know, he seemed very believable.
These seem like some really good stories of like people just fighting against dogmen, basically. And what I liked about this one is that how coordinated they all kind of seemed. Where it seemed like the big one went first, is like, I'll distract him. And the other two went around and it was like, okay, we'll come from this side. And this one was like, I'll come from this side and I'll be down here in case he jumps or whatever. And like, if it wasn't for those two bulls and everything, it's like, there was honestly no way he could have gotten out of that situation.
He was dead.
100%. Yeah. So it was like, it really seemed so awesome to see that kind of divine intervention kind of thing happen. But what really terrified me was just how coordinated what it seemed that they had to be. And it wasn't like simply like, oh, you know, like while we're hunting, you do this and I'll do this. No, it seemed like very planned out, like tactically, like what's the best scenario for, what's the best thing to do in this scenario?
I think the fact that it was once again like prayer and the invoking of Jesus' name that helped to rebuke or to save him from these things. That in and of itself should tell us that not only are these things not your friends, but they're also not just simple animals.
No.
Oh, Mr. Lonely over here is immediately discounting these guys as friends. Jeez, Anthony. You can make so many more friends if you just had a more open mind.
Well, maybe you and your friends try to eat each other. I don't know.
We told you to give Bigfoot apples and give Dogman a steak.
Don't you know? Don't want to do it. There's so many dogmen that are nice out there.
And there's vampires that need your blood, and you're just being selfish.
And there's ghosts that just need a friend. All right.
All right. Well, I volunteered Tony to be their friend and their meal.
There's zombies that want your brains, and you're over there like, these are my brains.
Selfish.
Yep. You sound like Ken and Barton when they came back from the conference. I just need some time for myself to process and all this other ridiculous whiny crap. And I'm like, oh yeah?
What about me?
What about me? You know? What about the fan?
Stop being selfish and think about me.
You're hoarding all your energy. So no, but seriously, what do you go ahead. You said you don't think they're your friends and
yeah, I mean these creatures are I mean, these are evil beings. That there's some kind of beings, and maybe there's not just one explanation for them. I think there's different types of beings. Sometimes they're humans, sometimes they're malevolent spiritual beings, but they, for some reason or another, take the same form. That there's something to this form that is just, I don't know. I mean, I don't know why they choose to take the form of like a werewolf, but regardless,
it might not be a choice. It might just be that it's whatever works. You know, I mean,
what if there's like a catalog and you just you go look through and
like a Sears catalog.
Yeah. Oh, look at that! They got the new. Oh, I like this one. I like a were-bunny. Not terrifying enough. Oh, the new werewolf.
Have you seen the new 2018 Toyota Tiger?
I'm going to definitely be, you know what? Not many people are using the Jaguar.
Well, what I really like also between these two stories, and, you know, I like it because it really shows how terrifying both encounters are, but just in different ways. In that the first one, you had a dog man that kind of chose when to attack. It kind of took away his dog, took away, like, you know, it kind of appeared once in a while, but it really wanted to attack him when it was just him by himself and somewhere secluded where he could, like, you know, pin.
He had him pinned.
Ambush him. Yeah.
You're talking about the first story.
The first story, basically, where it was, but it was never like, he was never super like when him and his brother were out there, and like he ran.
It ran off. Like, he was getting shot at too.
Well, yeah, I mean, also, but it was kind of like it wasn't prepared yet. Also, like it wasn't until it was hiding in that corner, waiting for him, and he came in by himself that it was like, okay, now I'm going to go for him 100%. And I'm going to try to, kill him. But then if you notice in the second story, it was like, okay, take care of the cow first. Okay. One of them sees him obviously like very early on, and then was still like, okay, we're still going to eat this cow entirely, and then we'll go deal with that. And then they very methodically went after him in a way tactically so that they could try to kill him as well. And it was just kind of terrifying to see like the differences in how they interact when they're together and how they interact when they're by themselves. But it's very like planned, very, very intelligent to still see like how their tactics will change based on who they're with.
Mm-hmm. And this isn't an isolated incident either. A lot of people think, oh, wow, interaction with Dogman fighting with people. This isn't unheard of. Yeah. And we've also heard of them fighting with bulls, fighting with hogs, fighting with coyotes, fighting with wolves, fighting with bears, fighting with other reptilians and Bigfoot and whatever. It is a creature that is probably pretty close to the top of the food chain on the land anyway. And they do what they do. But, there is another story, and I'm going to tell, that's not for tonight, but I'm going to tell it, and it's one on Lake Superior, where one of these things comes up out of the middle of the water. And so that is really weird, and it was huge. I mean, it was bigger than any of these creatures. Everything's bigger in the water,
Wait, so when did this
creepy.
The second story, when did this take place?
In the mid-90s.
Yeah, I was going to say that's especially eerie because anyone who's from this area in Texas will remember that Williamson County, especially back in the 80s, 90s, had a reputation for being like a hub for like satanic activity, mm-hmm. like occult black magic groups that they would
do ceremonies.
For some reason, all throughout this Williamson County, they were just everywhere.
Yeah, they even co-opted one of our uncle's barns at one point and did stuff in it.
Oh wow!
Yeah, and so that happened.
It's the cedar trees. It drives people crazy.
Well, no, those cedar trees weren't over there where my uncle's barn was. It was just down there in this bottom land across the road, on the county road from the Turner farm. And there was a barn over there that they had gone in and did all kinds of stuff. I just remember I was a kid, young, whatever. I think that was back in like the 80s or something. But anyway, folks, that's all the time we have for tonight. There is a lot of weird stuff that goes on in this world. Whether Clyde or Franklin's stories are to be believed, that's up to you. I felt like they were pretty credible, I have also, though, I do try to get, to the bottom of whatever I can. And I do have some more stories that are similar, not exactly the same, but in the similar vein that people have sent me and that other people have said, well, I'm not going to mess with that because it doesn't fit the narrative that these things are just not going to hurt you. There's people that are like, oh, if they wanted to hurt you, they will.
Well, I hate how there's like a guideline
always like defending
stories though, where it's like you need to be just good enough, but not too good, or you
right. Then there's like 7 types of dog, man. Get out of here, dude. First of all, most of them don't look like dogs. They're werewolf looking creatures, but whatever. Check out my books. I am now an author. If you didn't know this, The Bigfoot Phenomena, which is my second book. My first book, of course, was Werewolves and the Dogman Phenomena, and I am about to embark on a third book. So, thank you for listening. You can get those books on Amazon, and thank you for tuning in. We appreciate everything, and be sure and check out the live streams, which are YouTube exclusives Friday and Sunday. And good night. Don't let the werewolves bite.